Hey guys, tonight we're climbing aboard a 1720s Dutch East Indiaman. Not one of those sleek little yachts people use today to impress their neighbors, but a big, square-rigged, stubborn slab of oak designed to carry tea, spices, and the occasional bored sailor halfway around the planet. It's just before dawn in Amsterdam. The water is the color of pewter, and your breath hangs in the air like the last sigh of a tired candle. The wharves are crowded, merchants shouting in clipped Dutch, dockhands rolling barrels that smell of molasses, and a handful of stray dogs trotting around as if they own the joint. You're standing there with a bundle of clothes, a hammock, and the creeping suspicion that you've made a huge mistake. You probably won't survive this, but if you do, at least you'll have a great story for family dinners in 1735. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to keep me company, drop a comment with your location and the time where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ropes creak as the ship's longboats ferry the last loads of supplies, flour sacks, dried peas, salted beef, and something in a barrel marked only with a skull and crossbones. Historians still argue whether that's just a warning about strong spirits or a sign of questionable medicinal remedies that were very popular in the 18th century. You clamber aboard using a gangplank that feels about 3 inches wider than a broom handle. The deck smells like a mixture of pine tar and optimism. The captain, a man with a wig that looks like it could frighten small birds, stands near the quarterdeck, inspecting everyone with the faint air of someone mentally sorting you into helpful or deadweight. The first mate shouts an order and the crew moves into a flurry of activity. You're handed a coil of rope and told to make yourself useful, which, as you quickly discover, means standing out of the way until someone points at you. The ship begins to drift from the wharf, sails not yet fully set. The tide does most of the work at first, carrying you along the wide IJ River toward the open sea. Seagulls keep pace overhead, some diving low enough that you duck instinctively. One manages to drop something suspiciously soft on the hat of a nearby sailor. He doesn't even flinch, clearly a seasoned professional. You pass the warehouses lining the riverbank, their gabled roofs sharp against the pale sky. Each building has a winch jutting from its top floor for hauling goods up from the street. Workers lean from windows to wave, and you wave back, wondering if they're secretly relieved they're not the ones heading into months of shipboard diet and hygiene experiments. Somewhere on shore, a church bell strikes 6. A brisk wind picks up as you clear the last of the city, and now the real work begins. The canvas booms overhead like sudden thunder as the sails catch. Lines are hauled in with rhythmic shouts, blocks clack and groan. Your hands, still soft from land life, sting almost immediately. The North Sea awaits, but for now, the IJ is still smooth enough that you can stand without grabbing onto something. That won't last. The ship's wake curls away behind you, leaving a V-shaped trail that the rising sun paints gold. The cold air sharpens your senses, but there's already a faint taste of salt on your lips. The helmsman stands like a statue at the great whipstaff, guiding the ship's blunt bow toward the Zuiderzee. Off to port, low islands drift past, dotted with windmills turning lazily. One sailor, his name might be Pete, or maybe he just says Pete a lot, leans over and tells you this particular ship once made the voyage to Java in record time. 6 months, give or take. Give or take is apparently seafaring code for plus or minus a month. He follows it up by mentioning that the return trip can sometimes be slower if the winds are contrary, or if you stop to hunt whales. That last part, you hope, is a joke. As the morning wears on, the bustle eases. The city is a smudge behind you, the flat Dutch coastline slipping toward the horizon. A few fishing boats cross your path, their crews raising hands in lazy greeting. You're already learning the unspoken hierarchy of the deck. The officers bark and gesture. The petty officers translate that barking into something a normal human can understand. And the rest of the crew either obey instantly or pretend not to hear until yelled at again. By late afternoon, the ship is well into open water. The eyes-sheltered calm has given way to a mild chop that keeps you shifting your weight from foot to foot. The cook's first shipboard meal is served, a stew of beef so salted it might outlast the voyage, plus bread hard enough to audition as paving stones. One sailor swears the bread improves if you soak it in beer for half an hour. He demonstrates. It doesn't. As the dusk slides over the water, lanterns are lit along the deck. Their flickering glow makes the wet planks shine like black glass. Somewhere below, a fiddler strikes up a tune, not lively enough to dance to, just enough to murmur along with the creak and sigh of the ship. The sails overhead are pale ghosts against the deepening sky, and the wind carries the faint tang of the open sea. You find a spot near the bow, lean against the rail, and watch the last light fade from Amsterdam's direction. Tomorrow will be the North Sea in earnest. For tonight, there's only the gentle, steady push of the tide, the quiet hum of rope against wood, and the feeling, half excitement, half dread, that the real journey has only just begun. The first night on board turns out to be an introduction to a whole new category of discomfort you didn't know existed. The crew quarters are not so much a room as a low-ceilinged wooden tunnel, dimly lit by 2 oil lamps and smelling like a combination of wet wool, old tobacco, and the faint but persistent ghost of last week's salted herring. You duck to avoid the low beams. Too late, you crack your head on one and earn a nod of approval from an older sailor. Welcome to the club. Your hammock is strung between 2 posts, barely 2 paces apart. It sways gently with the ship's roll, though gently is generous. It's more like trying to sleep inside a slow-moving pendulum. Hammocks are meant to keep you off the damp planks and away from the inevitable rats, but they come with their own learning curve. If you flop into them too quickly, you spin sideways and deposit yourself unceremoniously onto the floor, which, as you soon learn, is how you meet your bunkmates. There are nearly 200 people on this ship: sailors, officers, cooks, gunners, a surgeon, and even a carpenter who looks like he's been built from the same oak as the hull. Space is so tight that you're practically breathing in unison. One man's foot is within arm's reach of your head, and it's unclear whether he knows or cares that it's missing half a toenail. Mainstream historical fact time. Dutch East Indiamen of this period were often over 150 feet long, which sounds spacious until you remember that length includes the cargo holds, the captain's quarters, and a lot of storage for cannon and rigging. The crew quarters are shoved into whatever's left. Think less cruise ship luxury and more wooden filing cabinet, human edition. The surgeon, a wiry fellow with spectacles, does a quick walk through, probably checking who's already seasick and who's likely to be his next patient. Historians still argue whether ship surgeons of the era were genuinely skilled or just particularly confident with knives. Either way, you decide to avoid his attention as much as possible. You lie back in your hammock, trying to adjust to the constant sway. Conversation hums in low tones. Someone talks about home, another boasts about surviving a storm in the Malacca Strait, and one fellow mutters that he's never been this far from land and hopes the sea doesn't notice him. A younger sailor, not much older than you, passes around a pouch of tobacco. You decline politely, unsure whether it's actual tobacco or some experimental blend that might double as caulking. Quirky tidbit: the biscuit rations. They're stored in barrels, each biscuit roughly the size and density of a paving brick. The official term is ship's biscuit, but most crew just call them tooth breakers. You've already seen one veteran knock a biscuit against the table and mutter, "Still good," as it chips a corner off the table. Sleep doesn't come easily. Every sound is magnified in the darkness. The creak of timbers, the slap of waves, the occasional shuffle of someone making their way to the ladder. Above you, boots thump softly as the night watch goes about their business. The air is warm from so many bodies, yet a faint draft seeps in through the hatch, carrying the scent of salt and tar. By morning, you're not sure if you've actually slept or just dozed in small fragments between noises. The cook's bell clangs. Breakfast. You shuffle into the mess area, where breakfast turns out to be more biscuit, this time with something called ship's butter, which is really just tallow with aspirations. One man brightens it up with a smear of molasses. Another dips his in rum. You try both and decide that hunger is still your best seasoning. Work begins almost immediately. Coiling lines, scrubbing decks, and fetching buckets of seawater for tasks that seem endless. Rope fibers cling to your fingers, leaving little splinters you'll discover at inconvenient moments for days. The bosun keeps a watchful eye, barking orders that sound urgent even when they aren't. Midday, a brief break. You lean against the rail and watch gulls wheel overhead, their calls sharp against the rush of wind. The coastline is still faintly visible behind you, but it's shrinking with each passing hour. A veteran sailor beside you squints at the horizon and tells you with absolute seriousness that if you whistle on deck, you'll summon a storm. Historians still debate whether sailors genuinely believe this or just enjoyed convincing newcomers to keep their mouths shut. Either way, you decide to hum quietly instead. Afternoon brings the ship's first drill. The gunners practice running out the cannon, loading powder without lighting it, and hauling everything back in again. The noise, even without gunfire, is startling in the confined space. You notice how many steps are needed just to get ready. No wonder naval battles could take hours of maneuvering before the first shot. As evening settles, you climb back into your hammock with a little more confidence. The day's work has left you too tired to overthink the swaying. Conversations fade earlier tonight, replaced by the rhythmic creak of wood and rope. Somewhere in the dark, a man starts singing a slow, almost mournful tune in Dutch. You don't understand the words, but the rise and fall of the melody fits the motion of the ship so perfectly that you find yourself breathing in time with it. The ship rocks gently, the air is just cool enough to keep you comfortable, and the thought slips in, soft and unhurried, that maybe you could get used to this life. For now, you let that thought drift with you into the quiet, steady dark. Morning arrives without fanfare. Just the change in light seeping through the hatch and the faint chill creeping into your hammock. The air feels sharper, saltier. When you climb up to the deck, you realize the ship has left the last trace of sheltered water behind. The North Sea stretches out like a restless sheet of hammered tin, the horizon a thin, wavering line. The wind has picked up, not enough to make the officers shout, but enough to send a constant spray over the bow. You learn quickly that standing too far forward means your boots will never be dry again. The waves aren't huge, but they have a way of tilting the deck under you just as you've found your balance, forcing you into a kind of slow-motion dance that's half survival, half clumsy comedy. The officers keep time by ringing the ship's bell. 8 bells marks the end of a watch, and each watch is 4 hours. It's a rhythm that will slowly reshape your days into a series of work and rest fragments until morning and night feel less like times of day and more like suggestions. Mainstream fact: the Dutch East India Company ran its ships on a strict schedule of watches, partly for efficiency and partly to keep the crew from turning feral out of boredom. Your own duties today involve hauling and securing lines along the main deck. The ropes are thick, rough, and never where you want them to be. They have a talent for tangling around your ankles when you're least prepared. Piet, the maybe his name is Piet sailor, shows you how to coil a line neatly. And though you try to mimic his movements, your coil ends up looking more like a startled octopus. He just grins and says, "Better than my first one," which you strongly suspect is a lie told for your benefit. Quirky tidbit: the ship's cat. She's a mottled, half-tailish creature with the dignified expression of someone who owns the place. Her unofficial job is rat control, but she seems more interested in supervising rope work and sitting in patches of sun. One sailor swears she can predict bad weather by the way her ears tilt, but historians still argue whether this is actual seafaring wisdom or just the kind of superstition that grows in a floating wooden village. By midday, the sky begins to shift. Low clouds drift in from the west, muting the sunlight into a silvery haze. The wind freshens, filling the sails until they drum and groan. The helmsman leans into the whipstaff, adjusting for each sudden swell. You find yourself glancing at the horizon more often now, scanning for anything: a distant ship, a darker patch of sea that might break the monotony. Lunch is served on deck to keep things moving. Salted beef again, this time with a ladle of pea soup thick enough to stand a spoon in. You eat with the bowl cupped in one hand, the other gripping a rope to keep from sliding into the scuppers when the ship lurches. Someone makes a joke about North Sea seasoning as a wave sends spray over half the crew. In the afternoon, the boatswain calls for maintenance work, scraping barnacles from the side where they've already begun to gather near the waterline. This means dangling over the side in a sling while waves slap at your boots, wielding a flat blade against stubborn shells. The work is strangely hypnotic, though the cold water numbs your fingers quickly. You can't help thinking of the barnacles as tiny hitchhikers hoping for a free ride to the tropics. The wind rises again toward evening. Not a storm, just the kind of stiff breeze that makes the rigging hum like the strings of an enormous, slightly out-of-tune instrument. You're on deck for the sunset, a quick affair here, the sun smearing gold and pink across the clouds before sinking behind the gray horizon. For a moment, the water looks almost calm, its constant motion hidden beneath the glow. After dark, the ship's lanterns glow faintly against the black sea. The watchmen pace, calling out their presence in the night to avoid being mistaken for a thief, or worse, a man asleep on duty. Below deck, the crew settles in, the sound of low conversation mixing with the ever-present creak and groan of the timbers. Someone starts telling a story about a ghost ship that appears in northern waters, its crew made entirely of drowned sailors who tried to trick living ships into following them. You pretend not to notice that the storyteller waits for every creak and knock to punctuate his tale. When you finally stretch into your hammock, the movement of the ship feels different than in the IJ. More unpredictable, less forgiving. The wood around you flexes with each wave, like the slow breathing of some huge animal. It's oddly comforting, even as you know the North Sea can turn from companion to adversary in a single night. Sleep comes in small rolling fragments again, but this time they're stitched together with the steady rhythm of water against the hull. Somewhere you hear the faint meow of the ship's cat, whether it's warning of bad weather or just demanding her share of supper, you can't say. Either way, you drift off with the taste of salt still fresh on your lips. You wake to a pale, almost milky light flooding down through the open hatch. The ship has tilted just enough that your hammock is pitched at a slight angle, and you slide toward one side until your shoulder presses into the canvas. When you climb topside, you find the wind calmer, the swells gentler. Good news, because today the ship is threading its way down the English coast. The shoreline lies off to starboard, low and green beneath a stretch of white chalk cliffs. They rise like giant sun-bleached teeth out of the water, streaked with lines of gray and ochre where the rock has weathered. You can just make out a few scattered cottages and the shapes of fishing boats close to shore. Even from this distance, it feels like you're peeking into someone else's quiet morning. Mainstream historical fact: merchant ships in the early 18th century often hugged coastlines for as long as possible in the early part of a voyage, not just for navigation, but because it offered a quick escape to a safe harbor if weather turned foul. The charts are detailed here, the landmarks familiar to navigators who've made this run dozens of times. Pete, still your most reliable source of information, points out that the smaller vessels nearby are probably coastal traders ferrying goods between towns. One even swings closer, its crew waving in lazy acknowledgement before tacking back toward land. You notice how their sails are patched in mismatched cloth, giving them the look of a quilt in motion. By mid-morning, the work begins again. Hauling lines to adjust the sails as the wind shifts slightly off the shore. It's not urgent work, but it's constant, like tending a fire that never quite reaches the right heat. Your hands, already rough from rope burn, ache with each pull, but you're starting to develop that unconscious knack for moving with the roll of the deck rather than against it. Quirky tidbit: one of the gunners swears that on this stretch of the coast, the cliffs whistle when the wind is right. You try to hear it, cupping a hand to your ear, but all you catch is the distant crash of waves against stone. Historians still argue whether such stories are born from actual acoustic quirks or from the human tendency to find music in any steady sound after enough time at sea. Lunch is more stew, though this one has been bulked out with something called sea pie, layers of biscuit and meat steamed together until they merge into a single, heavy entity. It's oddly comforting in the cool air, though you suspect the cook's real aim is to keep everyone too full to complain. In the afternoon, a brief excitement. A pod of porpoises appears, arcing in and out of the water off the bow. Their sleek bodies flash silver in the sunlight, and for a few minutes, the entire deck seems to pause just to watch. Even the captain emerges from the quarterdeck, his expression softening into something almost like a smile. Someone claims it's good luck to see porpoises, though another man mutters that it only means the weather's about to change. The breeze stays steady, though, and by evening you're further south. The cliffs have given way to lower, sandy shores, and the fishing boats have thinned out. The air carries a faint tang of wood smoke from some unseen village inland, mingling with the ship's own scent of tar and hemp. As night comes on, the lanterns glow warm against the deepening blue. You take a moment at the rail, watching the last line of land fade into shadow. The sea ahead is darker, broader, and it strikes you that soon there will be no more comforting edge to follow, only the open water. Below deck, the crew settles into their hammocks, the sound of muffled conversation blending with the familiar groans of the ship's frame. Someone produces a small tin whistle and plays a slow, looping tune. You can't help but notice how the melody follows the same up and down rhythm you've begun to feel in your own bones. When you close your eyes, the cliffs are still there in your mind, stark white against the green hills, the fishing boats bobbing in their lee. Tomorrow, though, there will be nothing but the wide mouth of the Bay of Biscay ahead, and you're not yet sure whether that thought makes you restless or eager. You ease into the Bay of Biscay the way you ease into a cold bath, slowly, with a lot of second thoughts, and trying not to make eye contact with the water. The shoreline has fallen away behind you, and in its place is a rolling expanse of pewter gray swells that don't crash so much as heave. The ship rides them like a patient ox, up and down, creaking with each long-bodied breath of the sea. You plant your feet a little wider and learn a new gait, not walking so much as flowing. If you had a cup of tea, it would slosh in rhythm. If you had 2 cups, well, you'd be wearing one of them. The morning watch begins with a low sky and a damp wind. Not a storm, not even close, just a steady moisture mist that slicks the deck until it gleams. The sails fill lazily, bellies sagging, and every rope wears a fine collar of salt. You're sent forward to help snug a lashing that has worried itself loose. The line is stiff with spray, and it rasps your palms as if it holds a personal grudge. Pete appears beside you with a grin, flips the lashing twice, and sets it tight in a motion that looks more like magic than knots. "Practice," he says, and you file that away under things easier said than done. Mainstream fact to tuck behind your ear, the Bay of Biscay has a reputation. Shallow shelves and long Atlantic swells can stack into heavy seas, and 18th century sailors learned to treat it with wary respect. Many ships preferred to time their passage for fair seasons, though a merchantman, on schedule, like yours, goes when the company says go. Today, luck leans your way. The Biscay that greets you is the dozy kind, as if it too has decided to take a long nap. The cook decides a sleepy sea calls for bravery in the galley. He announces an improvement to dinner: salt cod stew. You don't flinch, at least not outwardly. His recipe is simple. Soak the cod, boil the cod, then boil it again with onions and biscuit fragments until the whole pot looks like something between porridge and confession. He invites comments. No one offers any. The ship's cat sits near the galley door with the expression of a discerning critic, sniffs the steam, and pointedly licks her shoulder instead. That's joke one. When even the cat chooses self-care over cuisine, you know what's coming. Quirky tidbit: to freshen salted fish, some cooks would tuck sprigs of whatever herbs they could scrounge, parsley if near land, peppercorns if someone had miscounted the captain's stores, even orange peel saved from earlier rations. In your pot, you spot exactly one suspiciously triumphant bay leaf doing all the heavy lifting. Historians still argue whether shipboard cooks of the VOC had official training or simply accumulated techniques the way a hull accumulates barnacles, slowly, unevenly, and with surprising tenacity. The day stretches on in slow, elastic hours. The swell has its own schedule, each lift taking a patient count of 3. You get the deck washing detail, which feels redundant. Why wash something the ocean is already washing? But there's method in it. Pooled filth rots rope, draws pests, and makes boots slip. You sluice seawater from bucket to plank, sweeping it along with a bunched mop called a swab. The water slides away in rivulets, revealing the grain of timber, scuffed and scored from 1,000 footfalls. By noon, the deck is clean enough that the bosun's eyebrows relax half a degree, which is basically applause. At the rail, you watch storm petrels dance low over the surface, skimming so close they seem to touch the skin of the sea. Piet calls them Mother Carey's chickens, and taps the rail to ward off ill luck, then laughs at himself for the tapping. Superstition and irony live side by side here, like hammocks strung 3 hands apart. Someone claims a whale spouted at dawn. Someone else declares it was just a particularly ambitious wave. You didn't see either, so you nod wisely, which is sailor for "I'm staying out of it." After midday, the wind veers. The mates call for a brace adjustment, and you haul the heavy yards a few degrees to keep the sails drawing. It's fussy work, like turning a massive dial to tune in a station that never quite comes in clearly. The ship answers, though, and her groan lowers by a key, a contented cello note in the body of the hull. Joke 2 sneaks in. If the ship were a person, she'd be that relative who narrates every step of standing up from a chair, and we're moving. While you catch your breath by the foremast, a veteran tells you about Biscay sleepers, great long swells that pretend they're harmless until they stack with another and give the ship an impish shove. They'll slop your soup right into your lap, he says, and 5 minutes later, a swell obliges, tipping your tin mug just enough to baptize your trousers with tepid pee. The sea has timing and possibly a sense of humor. Afternoon brings the smell of galley steam drifting aft. It's the salt cod stew's grand debut. Tin bowls clatter into hands, and you find a spot near the main hatch to negotiate your portion. The stew is thick, pale, and glossy, with biscuit shards soft enough to be mistaken for potatoes if you close your eyes and lie to yourself cheerfully. You taste. It's fine. The exertions of the day help. A dash of vinegar appears, passed around like contraband. 2 drops make the difference between edible and oddly nostalgic. Joke 3, charitable edition. On long voyages, seasoning is mostly hope. Here's a quiet, useful fact that doubles as comfort. The Dutch East India Company often issued citrus or vinegar on parts of the outward run, not out of modern understanding of vitamin C, but because crews noticed they felt better with it. Whether it was consistent policy or captain's preference, historians still argue whether VOC provisioning manuals prescribed citrus strictly or left it to local availability and the quartermaster's mood. Either way, your spoonful of vinegar turns the stew from confession to penance completed. A short rain sweeps across the deck near sunset, a soft gray curtain that tracks from port to starboard in 5 measured minutes. The crew works through it without comment. When it passes, everything shines. Ropes, rails, even the cat, who stalks along the lee scuppers with damp dignity, pausing to investigate a bead of water as if it owes her money. You remember the fiddler from a few nights back. He plays again now, something low and looping. The tune seems to iron out the remaining kinks in the day. Below, the hammocks sway in longer arcs, the Biscay lullaby you were warned about. Someone starts a debate about the best biscuits, Holland or Zeeland bake. You can tell it's a favorite because voices stay good-natured while opinions are fierce. A carpenter adds that the best biscuit is yesterday's because the weevils pick the freshest ones. That earns a groan and a laugh. And you silently inspect your ration by lantern light. No movement. You pretend that means victory. There's a chart spread under the captain's elbow on the quarterdeck, ink lines arcing toward the open Atlantic. You sneak a look when you're sent with a message and catch the elegant geometry of windroses and rum lines. The navigator's divider clicks against the paper with the careful sound of someone counting out days of weather, food, and patience. You think of Amsterdam shrinking behind you, of the Canary Islands ahead on the invisible road, and how 1,000 ordinary moments will braid into this one voyage. Night folds in gently, navy blue shading to near black. The bell marks the change of watch. You trade places and warmths. Your hammock still holds the shape of the man who just left it. The ship murmurs. Biscay breathes. You can almost hear the bay leaf from dinner still doing its best back in the galley, heroic and hopeless. The deck luffs once, then settles. In that constant rise and roll, you let your muscles soften. Sleep comes with the taste of salt and a faint whiff of cod, which is not romantic, but it is honest. If the sea were going to throw a tantrum, it would have done so today. Instead, it offered a long shrug and a watery smile. You take that as a good sign, or at least as one day banked against whatever the weather decides to invent next. For now, you let the hammock cradle you, the ship sigh around you, and your thoughts drift toward warm, dry places, like the exact square foot of deck where you did not spill pea soup. The air smells different before you even see the islands. Warmer, rounder somehow, carrying a faint sweetness you can't quite name. Dawn finds you leaning against the rail, half awake, as the Canary Islands rise from the sea like sleepy green and brown giants. They're jagged at the top, cloud-shawled in places, and stitched with lighter patches where villages cling to the slopes. After days of open water, the sight of land feels like someone cracked a window in your head. The ship drifts toward a small harbor with the slow confidence of a beast that's made this trip before. The sails are trimmed to just enough to keep steerage, and the anchor crew is already working the windlass in a lazy rhythm. The harbor itself isn't grand. No sweeping stone quays here, just a cluster of jetties, a few low warehouses, and fishing boats whose nets hang drying in the sun like giant, tattered curtains. Mainstream historical fact: the VOC and other European merchant fleets often used the Canary Islands as a resupply point on their way to the east. Here you could take on fresh water, citrus, and any extra goods the captain fancied. Sometimes wine, sometimes textiles, sometimes gossip, which seems to be traded as freely as anything in barrels. The air grows softer as you glide into the anchorage. Shore smells drift aboard: wood smoke, tar, fish, and something sweet, perhaps citrus blossom, that makes the crew collectively inhale like they're sniffing fresh bread. The captain shouts orders in a voice just shy of cheerful, and soon the anchor splashes down with a deep, resonant plunge that sends ripples rolling outward. The hull settles into stillness so sudden it feels like the floor has stopped breathing. Quirky tidbit: some sailors swore that even a single night ashore in a warm port like this could reset your sea legs, which meant you'd be stumbling all over again when you put to sea. Historians still argue whether this was genuine physical truth or just an excuse for particularly dramatic performances when boarding again. Piet says it's true for him, but you suspect he just likes being carried up the gangplank. The first boat ashore is for official business: the captain, the purser, and a few hands to oversee loading barrels. The second boat, yours, is for labor. You row hard toward the pier, oars dipping in practiced alternation until the keel thumps gently against sun-warmed timbers. Setting foot on unmoving ground after so many days feels both alien and deeply comforting. Your legs try to remember how to walk without compensating for a rolling deck, and you sway like a polite drunk down the pier. The market is small but busy. Fishermen hauling baskets of sardines still slick from the sea, women selling loaves of bread so fresh the crust crackles, and stalls stacked high with bright yellow lemons and oranges. The purser buys citrus by the barrel, the vendors tossing each fruit into wooden casks lined with straw. You carry one of the casks back toward the longboat, and the smell of the fruit warms in the sun until it practically glows in your nose. There's wine, too, dark, rich, and sold in squat casks bound with reed. The captain allows a small purchase, partly for morale, partly for trading later. You're handed one of the smaller casks and told not to drop it. Its weight pulls against your arms all the way back to the pier. Lunch ashore is a rare luxury. Bread, cheese, and slices of orange that sting your tongue with sweetness after weeks of salt-heavy fare. Joke 1 of the day. Pete holds up a lemon wedge and claims it's just like ship's biscuit, only wetter. You nearly choke on your own laughter. You notice other ships in the harbor. A Spanish sloop loading barrels of salted tuna, a squat coastal trader with a patched sail, and a French merchantman that seems in no hurry to leave. Crews call to each other in a blend of languages, swapping news of weather and shipping lanes. You hear that a storm's been gnawing at the Azores for days. Information the captain will weigh carefully when plotting the next leg. By afternoon, the ship is restocked. Fresh water, fruit, casks of wine, and a few crates of dried fish to bulk out the stores. The crew lingers on shore until the captain makes the inevitable call to board. Joke 2. Pete pretends not to hear until you wave an orange under his nose. Back aboard, the deck feels unfamiliar again, your weight rocking against the solid planks instead of the earth's stillness. You help stow the barrels in the cool shadows of the hold, the air there now tinged with the sharp sweet scent of citrus. The purser ticks items off his list, muttering in satisfaction. As evening settles, the harbor lights flicker on. Oil lamps in windows, torches on the pier. The town sounds carry faintly over the water. Laughter, a dog barking, the slow toll of a bell marking the hour. On deck, the crew sits in small knots, sharing wedges of lemon or orange, savoring each bite like it's treasure. Joke 3. One man claims the lemons are so fine he might marry one if the parson will allow it. The ship rocks gently at anchor, the sails furled and quiet, the mast silhouetted against a silvered moon. Tomorrow, you'll turn your bow toward the deep tropics, the heat and the long blue emptiness ahead. But tonight, the air is still, the fruit bins are full, and the harbor holds you in a rare moment of calm. You lean on the rail, watching the lantern-lit water lap at the hull, and think that for all its distance from home, this warm humming port feels almost like a pause button for the voyage. The first thing you notice after leaving the Canary Islands is the air, thicker, warmer, as if someone turned the world's dampness up a notch and forgot to turn it back down. The ship moves into a deeper blue, the kind of blue that looks heavy, and the horizon seems higher, rounder, like a lid settling onto a simmering pot. Tar breathes in the heat. It softens and releases a sweet, resinous smell that clings to the back of your throat. The decks grow hot underfoot. Someone suggests going barefoot to save your boot soles from turning into pancakes. Someone else suggests keeping the boots on unless you want a souvenir splinter the size of a knitting needle. You compromise with thick socks and the nimble walk of a cat crossing a stove. Work adjusts to the climate. The officers ease the pace at noon, because men dropped by heat help no one, and the bosun's bark becomes a hoarse advisory rather than a constant thunderclap. You learn to linger in slivers of shade cast by the great square sails, moving with them as the sun arcs. On the leeward side, the air is warmer, yes, but it's also quieter, and the sea glitters there like a tray of spilt nails. Pete, who has opinions about everything, declares that sweating is good, honest labor, and then proceeds to drip like a melting candle for the next 4 hours. Mainstream historical fact slides in with the breeze. These are the northeast trade winds, steady workhorses blowing from roughly the northeast toward the equator, the reason 17th and 18th century sailing routes look like elegant arches on charts. Mariners learned to ride these reliable winds west and south before turning east with other systems, a trick the Portuguese called the volta do mar, the turn of the sea. You aren't the navigator, but you can feel the logic in your body. The ship holds a line with less fuss, less bracing, as if it's slotted onto a track you can't see. Below deck, the hold now breathes citrus. Each time a hatch opens, a draft of cool, pithy perfume rises from the casks and creeps along the beams. The surgeon makes a show of cutting wedges for the sickly-looking and the newly sunburned. Morale rises in proportion to the stickiness of fingers. Historians still argue whether the VOC consistently issued citrus on outbound legs, or if it depended on the captain's zeal and what the quartermaster could scrounge. Either way, nobody complains about the lemons. Even Pete, who once claimed he'd marry one, now treats them like weekday saints. The heat does strange things to the ship. Tar oozes from seams in glossy beads and leaves black fingerprints wherever you steady yourself. Hemp lines relax, fibers swelling just enough to need retightening. You spend a full watch nipping and tucking rigging, tiny adjustments that feel fussy until you realize the alternative is chafe and failure far from any helpful shoreline. The smell of hot oak rises off the bulwarks. a toasted wood scent that mingles with salt and, when the galley fires, smoke. The cook, perhaps sobered by the canary experiment, keeps lunch simple. Peas, beef, biscuit, softened into something gentle by the humidity. Joke 1, humidity is the best cook on board. It finally turns a toothbreaker into a tooth suggester. You learn new shadecraft. Old sailcloth appears, stitched into floppy-brimmed hats by men who never claimed to be tailors but now produce millinery with alarming confidence. One gunner has added a jaunty frill, another has sewn on a strip of copper to hold the brim down, which works until the copper burns his forehead and he reconsiders. Quirky tidbit: some crews rubbed pig fat or lamp oil on their noses and ears as a sun salve. It works, after a fashion, if your goal is to smell like a candle that lost an argument. You try the hat and the shade and resolve to keep your nose in the shadow of your hand whenever possible. The sea itself changes character. It's flecked with sargassum weed in lazy mats, each tendril sheltering tiny shrimp and juvenile fish. Storm petrels still skitter, but now you see flying fish for the first time. They burst from the surface in glittering volleys, wings really elongated fins, whirring like silver fans. They glide just above the skin of the water for 20, 30 yards, sometimes more, then flick back under in a skitter of droplets. The whole crew watches the first time, everybody soft with wonder in the heat. Piet declares them the ship's messengers on account of how they always seem to know the way forward. 5 minutes later, one misjudges and smacks into the bulwark with a damp thwack, marking itself a volunteer for breakfast. Joke 2 writes itself. Even the fish want to join the crew. Benefits include immediate promotion to the frying pan. There are new sounds in this latitude. A constant hissing under the usual chorus of creaks, the whisper of wind in taut canvas, and the soft pop-pop of tiny bubbles in weed mats as they roll under the hull. The cat patrols the shaded side, choosing each plank with solemn care, tail tip twitching. She pauses to inspect the flying fish corpse with professional interest, and then leaves it to the cook with a magnanimous look that says, "I could have taken it, but I'm watching my figure." You recall her disdain for the salt cod stew and decide her standards are less high than situational. Afternoons stretch. The bell marks time that feels syrupy around the edges. Men nap in any patch of shadow, hammocks strung above spare coils of rope, heads pillowed on folded jackets that smell like tar and lemon rinds. Cards appear, greasy little rectangles hammered soft by use, and a slow game unfurls under a water barrel. Someone hums, someone sharpens a knife in small soothing strokes. You tune your ear to the subtle difference between a good creak and a bad creak, the way a householder learns which step groans because it's old and which groans because it's failing. Historians still argue whether VOC crews were given enough fresh water for regular washing in the tropics. Ration books suggest parsimony, but journals hint at occasional splashes for the face and hands when casks ran plentiful. Today your wash is a rag dipped in a bucket and wrung out with reverence. Toward evening, the sky goes theatrical. Towering clouds pile to the south like mountains made of cream, each one casting anvil-shaped shadows that roll over you like passing continents. Lightning flickers inside them, silent at this distance, like lanterns snuffed and relit by a giant. The mate watches, thumb tapping the rail. You'll cross the equatorial belt of calm and squalls soon enough, but for now the trades keep shouldering you along, the ship keeping her quiet, eager line. You think ahead to the doldrums you've been warned about, days of glass water and no wind, and tuck that worry under your hat brim alongside the heat. Evening meal is blessedly brief: biscuit softened in broth, a sliver of pork, and the flying fish which the cook pan-fries with a scandalous pinch of pepper filched from somewhere mysterious. The flesh is delicate, almost sweet. The entire crew becomes instant connoisseurs, which is to say they say, "Not bad," and then lick their fingers until their knuckles shine. Joke 3, if the cat gets a bite, she writes a favorable review. If not, she schedules a stern editorial. Night in the tropics unveils a new kind of brightness. The stars feel lower, more numerous, like spilled salt across black lacquer. The wake glows with phosphorescence, tiny living lanterns igniting where the hull parts the water. You trail your fingers in a bucket and make galaxies bloom with each swirl. A man near you tells of St. Elmo's fire, blue flames that sometimes crown the mastheads in storms, sailors' candles that mean protection or portent, depending on who's telling it. You've never seen it, yet. The idea tucks itself behind your eyes, ready to leap out at the next spark. Sleep comes easier now that you've learned the ship's summer lullaby. Your hammock cradles the day's ache. A faint cross breeze drifts through the open hatch. Somewhere forward, the carpenter tells a story about Biscay sleepers, and someone else answers with a story about horse latitudes, where ships becalmed supposedly threw horses overboard to save water. Historians still argue whether that happened often, or if it's one of those tales that survives because it sounds miserably plausible. Water barrels knock softly in their chocks. A lemon rolls escapes across the table and is rescued by a quick hand. You murmur thanks to the anonymous hero of the bay leaf back in the Biscay stew, because in heat like this, even a memory of flavor is a kindness. Before you close your eyes, you step topside one last time. The sails are pale ghosts against the dark. The trade wind hums a gentle, tireless note. Far off, a line of heat lightning stitches and unstitches the horizon without a sound. The ship presses on, warm and alive, carrying you through a night bright with sea fire and stars. You lean on the rail, palms sticky with tar and lemon, and breathe in air that feels like it's going to hold you there, on the edge of sleep, long enough for the flying fish to make another little silver run in your dreams. By the time the line between sea and sky turns from black to charcoal gray, the air has gone slack. You wake to stillness, not quiet, but the peculiar hush of a ship without wind. The sails hang loose, their great bellies sagging inward like empty lungs. The rigging no longer hums. Instead, it gives the occasional bored creak, as if to say, "Well, this is awkward." The ship drifts in water so flat it looks poured, not stirred. Welcome to the doldrums. The temperature feels heavier here. Even before the sun clears the horizon, your shirt sticks to your back. There's no shade unless you make it, and the patches cast by the sails shift just slowly enough to be useless. Men who never seem to sit now sprawl on deck with their shirts open, talking in the low tones people use when it's too hot to bother arguing. The cat flops in the shadow of the capstan, stretched long, ears twitching lazily at flies. Mainstream historical fact: the equatorial calm belt, called the doldrums, could trap sailing ships for days or even weeks. Without wind, navigation slowed to a crawl, food spoiled faster in the heat, and tempers soured in proportion to the ship's water supply. Some captains ordered boats out to tow the ship ahead by rowing, but with a vessel this size, progress was barely measurable. Historians still argue whether doldrum stories of going backward in currents were exaggerated or just proof that boredom makes every mile feel twice as long. Quirky tidbit: some crews believed whistling could summon wind, a reversal of the North Sea superstition about it, calling storms. Here, the boatswain actually encourages it. Half the crew spends the morning whistling tunelessly, just in case the weather spirits are listening. Joke 1. Pete attempts a lively jig of a whistle, runs out of breath, and claims the wind took it. The day's work becomes a patchwork of small chores. Without wind to fight, you can repair anything that's been left good enough until now. Seams are retard, canvas patches stitched into worn sails, blocks oiled until they gleam. You're sent aloft with needle and palm to help mend a rent in the topgallant sail. Up there, the horizon feels impossibly wide, the ship suspended in the middle of a mirrored world. Below, the sea is so clear you can see its green-blue shading a good 10 feet down before the color deepens into mystery. By noon, the heat has become a slow, sticky blanket. The cook refuses to light his galley fire until later, claiming it would boil us all from the inside. Lunch is cold biscuit, cheese soft enough to spread with your thumb, and slices of the precious oranges from the Canary Islands. The citrus is a burst of sharp life in your mouth, and for a moment you feel like you've swallowed part of the sun. Joke 2. Someone says if you leave the peel on deck, maybe the smell will lure the wind in like a curious dog. The water is so still it starts to play tricks on your eyes. Reflections sharpen until clouds look like pale whales swimming upside down under the surface. Once you swear you see movement, a glint of silver, a shadow that swells and drifts away. A man beside you says it's a Dorado, and that they sometimes follow ships for days, hoping for scraps. Later, you see one leap clean from the water, scales flashing gold in the hard light. Afternoon is when the games start. With the ship barely moving, there's no danger in dangling lines over the side to fish. Hooks, baited with bits of biscuit, vanish into the blue, and within an hour 3 decent-sized fish flop on deck. The cat approves, which is her way of saying she'll forgive the heat for now. The carpenter proposes a race of deck crawls, which is exactly what it sounds like. Men on hands and knees, dodging coils of rope and the occasional bucket. No one wins except the onlookers, who get an afternoon's worth of laughter out of it. The stillness also brings out the storytellers. You hear tales of ships trapped so long in the doldrums that they ran out of beer and had to drink brackish water, of men seeing mirages, green islands that vanished as they rowed toward them, of sudden squalls that came and went in minutes, leaving steam rising from the planks. Historians still debate how much is truth and how much is heat-induced embellishment, but you find yourself believing more than you might on a cooler day. Heat has a way of making the improbable feel reasonable. Late in the afternoon, the air changes just enough that you notice it. Less heavy, faintly cooler. The sails give a single lazy pop, then settle again. But it's a promise. Evening brings the first real cloud cover all day, piling high and white to the west. Dinner, finally cooked, is a fish stew that tastes almost like patience rewarded. Joke 3. Pete claims the fish jumped aboard willingly, too bored to swim anymore. When night falls, the glassy water takes on a black lacquer sheen. Stars burn sharp overhead, their reflections pricked into the sea until it feels like you're sailing through a doubled sky. The wake still glows faintly with phosphorescence, though it's less a trail now than a lazy shimmer around the hull. The air is easier to breathe, cooler, and you stretch out in your hammock with the faint hope that by morning the sails will fill again. As you drift off, you think about how the voyage has slowed to the pace of your own heartbeat. There's no hurry here, just the quiet, the heat, and the unbroken line of horizon. Somewhere beyond it, the Cape of Good Hope waits, but for now the ship lies still, holding its breath with the rest of you, waiting for the wind to remember your name. Sometime before dawn, a breath finds your cheek. It's so gentle you almost miss it, a cool thread sliding across sweaty skin. Then another, and another, until the sails give a tentative rustle, like someone stirring in sleep. By first light, they're filling for real, little pops and tugs running up the canvas, as if the rig is taking long, waking stretches. The heat loosens its grip. The ship leans into the slightest promise and begins to move, not drifting, but going, as though a hand on your back has finally said, "All right, up." The day builds itself around that new feeling. Low, cottony clouds herd themselves along, and the water loses its lacquered mirror and grows a delicate texture, cat's paws skittering across it. The crew can't help smiling. Even the cat sits up and blinks like a magistrate acknowledging a petition. Pete purses his lips to whistle and then thinks better of it. No sense confusing the spirits, he says, which is sailor for, let's not jinx it. Joke 1. He adds that the wind finally answered yesterday's whistling after taking the scenic route. By noon, the light has sharpened, shadows thinned, and the air tastes faintly of chill. You've dropped a few degrees south, and the ship is sliding under the belt of squalls. Abrupt, muscular showers that gallop out of nowhere and thump across the deck, each one ending with a rainbow so neat it feels like a signed receipt. Sails are reefed and shaken out again, a bellows rhythm that teaches your hands where every knot lives without looking. The officers' faces, so patient in the doldrums, now show a bright, fox-like alertness. Momentum returns not just to the hull, but to the people inside it. Mainstream historical fact. Toward the southern tip of Africa, the Agulhas Current sweeps southwest along the coast, meeting westerly winds and swell. That meeting can stack seas into steep, dangerous waves. One reason the place earned its older nickname, the Cape of Storms. Diaz took the hint. King Zhao II rebranded it the Cape of Good Hope, which sounds much nicer on recruitment posters. You're not close enough yet to feel the current's teeth, but the rumor of it is in the water. Longer swells, a deeper note in the hull. Birds announce the latitude change before land ever does. Storm petrels multiply. Cape pigeons, black and white, neat as dominoes, wheel over the wake. Then a bigger shadow, an albatross, wings outstretched so long it seems to redraw the horizon. It barely flaps, riding invisible lines you can't see. Eye cold and ancient when it slides past. Someone bows, joking, not joking. Quirky tidbit. There's a quiet taboo about harming an albatross. Some crews mutter that they carry the souls of lost sailors. Others just say it's bad luck to sour the only company you'll have for 1,000 miles. The cat raises precisely one whisker at the giant bird and decides it is not a mouse, therefore not her problem. The temperature keeps sinking, the air growing lean. You pull on a coat that smells like old smoke and tar, and your breath starts to show in quick white puffs at night. The tar that oozed in the tropics is now a sensible solid again, and the rig sings in a lower key. The hands rub fingers, stamp feet, and rediscover a fondness for hot things. The cook obliges with pea soup de Clare. It arrives thick enough to support a spoon. He claims it's a Cape strength recipe and taps the rim with his ladle to prove the point. Joke 2. He says if it gets any colder, he'll add a nail to the pot so the iron can warm us from the inside. Work turns braced and purposeful. You're put to the pumps and to the braces, the two great acts of keeping a wooden world alive. The bosun's voice cuts cleanly through the wind. Haul! Yardarms creak, blocks clack. The ship begins to wear the big-shouldered posture of a thing built for this, bow taking the seas square and shrugging them aside like a bull through brush. A sudden skitter of hail patters briefly across the quarterdeck, tiny white stones that melt as fast as they fall. Everyone looks at everyone else with the same expression. Ah, yes, the Cape says hello. There's land finally, but only if you know where to look. The day is glass clear after a squall, and far off, a smear on the edge, darker than cloud. You see it. The first shapes are just suggestions, more absence than presence. Then the light shifts, and the long mountain flank lays itself along the horizon, impossibly level-topped. Table Mountain, someone says, even at this distance. A pale cloth of cloud unrolls over its summit and pours down the sides without ever reaching the bottom. Local sailors call it the tablecloth, a neat name for a neat trick. It lasts 10 minutes, then it's gone. A glimpse and then a story. You try to memorize the shape in that quick window, the way people do with faces seen out a carriage window and never again. Mainstream fact tucked into that view. The VOC planted a refreshment station at the Cape in the 1650s. Gardens and stock to feed passing ships. A lot of company men stopped there outward and homeward for water, vegetables, and repairs. Your captain weighs wind and schedule and chooses to keep his distance. Maybe the stores are good enough, maybe the wind's too fair to surrender. Historians still argue whether captains who skipped the Cape for speed made better time overall or simply swapped sure vegetables for uncertain glory. You can't say. You only know the smell of cabbage would be welcome. Afternoon grows big and boisterous. The westerlies harden into a proper shove, and the sea heaves in the long line sailors call rollers. The ship's gait lengthens. You rise and fall for what feels like floors at a time. Spray wets to tatters and flies off downwind like silk confetti. Somewhere forward, a man whooped during a rise and then bit his tongue on the fall. He sticks it out to show you the bite, proud and wounded all at once. You throttle a laugh and offer him a lemon wedge, which he pretends will cure dignity as well as scurvy. The vinegar barrel makes a cameo at supper. Its sharpness is a morale instrument, and the purser knows when to play it. Night brings a string of squalls, each one with its own personality. One slaps and leaves. One lingers and drums on the deck. One arrives politely and departs without comment. Between them, the stars are so bright you could count rigging strands by their light. Over the foremast, for a breath, you see a brush of pale blue sizzle, the briefest kiss of St. Elmo's fire, and a murmur runs the length of the deck. A fair sign, Pete whispers, then, hedging his bets, touches wood. Joke 3. He vows to stop whistling forever and then immediately forgets and whistles for the cat. The albatross returns in the morning and floats in your lee for an hour as if to audit your seamanship. The helmsman gives it a look reserved for important inspectors. The breeze is snappish, the kind that makes canvas talk. You go aloft with numbed fingers to check a chafe point you've been mothering since the doldrums, and when you look out from the top, the whole world looks drafted with a ruler. Swell lines running true to the horizon, clouds in lanes, the ship's wake an arrow pointed east. Somewhere under that line, currents are knotting and unknotting in ways you can't see. You think of maps, of the neat rum lines at the captain's elbow and how they pretend this exact moment isn't a conversation between wind, water, wood, and luck. There's a small ceremony no one announces. A coin, dented, nothing special, is nailed under a seam near the mainmast foot. A carpenter taps it home with 2 economical blows. "For rounding," he says, not looking at you. You give him a nod and a look that promises to keep your mouth shut. Quirky as it is, the ship seems to stand a little taller afterward. Tiny faiths pile up like coils of rope, harmless, handy, and good to have when the sky darkens. The sky does darken, briefly, in the late afternoon. A bruise-colored cloud pile marches over you, and for 20 minutes you feel small. The sea goes crook-backed and mean. A wall of water comes on, and the bow lifts over it with such deliberate grace you feel the hull's satisfaction in your bones. Everything that can be lashed is lashed. Everything loose finds its place. The cat, offended by spray, vanishes to her secret dry spot that no human has yet located. When the worst has blown through, the world cleans itself with a white-toothed grin. Foam exploding off the crests, air wrung fresh and cold, men laughing because their voices sound bright in the new light. By sunset, you've put the cape behind your beam, not a conquest, but a negotiation that went well. The last knife edge of land is a darker smudge in a pearl-gray sky, and then even that is a memory. The ship points into a bluer, emptier east than you've known yet. Somewhere beyond this clean horizon waits the long Indian Ocean, a day that will turn into many days of sail mending and watch bells and quiet jokes about heroic bay leaves. You rub heat back into your fingers, tuck your coat tight, and feel the deep, happy tiredness of work done right. In your hammock that night, with the ship still muscled up and steady under you, you listen for the old lullabies, the tar creak, the block knock, the soft slap under the counter, and hear instead a new one, the faint hiss of colder foam, the low moan of wind in a tauter rig, the deep approving thrum of a hull that has remembered what it was made for. You close your eyes and see again the tablecloth cloud, the ambling albatross, the coin tucked under wood, and you think with a small private smile that you have rounded a corner of the world and it did not round you first. The Indian Ocean doesn't greet you with a dramatic curtain rise. It just begins. One day the swell has that long Atlantic roll, the next it's tighter, quicker, as though the sea has swapped boots for lighter shoes. The wind shifts too, sliding around to push you more from behind, and the sails fill with a steadier, fuller belly. You don't notice the change all at once, more like waking to realize the room you're in has been repainted overnight. The air is warmer again, but not the sticky blanket of the tropics you left behind. This is a dry, salt-bright heat that tugs at your lips and makes the water barrel more interesting than any bottle of wine in the hold. The decks are pale with sun, the shadows sharp. Work hums along without the frantic bursts of Cape weather, just the constant, repetitive rhythm of keeping a ship in good order for weeks on end. Mainstream historical fact, an outward-bound Dutch East Indiaman could take 4 to 6 weeks to cross from the Cape of Good Hope to Java, depending on winds and stops. This stretch of sea was notorious for its sameness. No coasts to hug, few other ships to spot, and nothing to break the monotony but the occasional squall. Navigators relied on dead reckoning, celestial fixes, and an intimate sense of the ship's speed, all while the Indian Ocean kept her own schedule. The sameness is what gets you. Days blend. The bell's 8-ring cadence divides time into watches, but the watches themselves are a loop. Coil rope, haul line, check chafing gear, pump the bilge, swab the deck, repeat. Joke 1, Pete says the only way to know what day it is to check if your shirt has become entirely salt by now, or just mostly. Quirky tidbit, some VOC captains allowed music on the Indian Ocean crossing to keep morale from fraying. Fiddles, tin whistles, and even improvised drums from empty casks would surface after the evening mess. Your ship is no exception. 3 nights a week, the carpenter's mate produces a battered violin and saws out reels and slow airs, the sound skipping over the deck like wind-driven spray. The wind holds steady from the southeast, a following breeze that keeps you in easy motion. The ship develops a long, even gait, each rise and fall predictable enough that you can carry a bowl from one end of the deck to the other without spilling a drop, as long as you keep to the rhythm. Meals become more bearable in this steadiness. The cook experiments, once daring to stew dried apples with pork. The sweetness catches you by surprise and makes you think of home. Joke 2, he tells you it's an ancient family recipe, then admits he only invented it because the pork barrel was leaking. Every few days, a squall pops up on the horizon, a dark, fast-moving blot that slides over you with drumming rain, freshens the air, and then wanders off. The crew learns to reef and shake out sails in a sort of lazy competition. Which watch can do it faster without dropping a single line into a tangle? You're getting better. Your hands find the right rope by touch alone now. Your feet plant automatically to the heel of the deck. Evenings bring their own kind of spectacle. The sunsets are broad affairs out here. Huge smears of orange and violet that seem to last forever, fading into a dome full of stars so thick it feels like you're inside a snow globe. Phosphorescence trails from the wake most nights. Sometimes it's so bright you can see it curling around the rudder like liquid fire. Historians still argue whether sailors in this era believed the glow to be living creatures, magic, or simply the sea's mood. But either way, it's a sight that never quite dulls. To break the monotony, the officers sometimes order sail repairs just for the sake of being ready. You spend an afternoon high on the foremast, patching a seam no bigger than your hand, the canvas breathing under your palms. From up there, the horizon is a perfect circle, no closer in any direction. You realize with a start that you haven't seen another ship in 12 days. One night, the wind dies for just a few hours, and the sea lies flat as hammered tin. You and P8 lean over the rail and watch the stars reflected perfectly below, as though the ship is hanging between two skies. A faint splash breaks the illusion, something big, unseen, passing under the hull. Shark, P8 guesses. Or a whale. He says it lightly, but you both keep your eyes on the water a while longer. Joke 3, he says, if it was a mermaid, she's probably just checking the paintwork. By the 3rd week out, the crew has settled into a pace that feels both endless and entirely normal. Water is rationed carefully, but a lucky rainfall one afternoon allows the men to strip to the waist and scrub themselves with scoops of rainwater, a rare luxury. The cat, disdainful, stays dry under a coil of rope and grooms herself while everyone else drips and laughs. The ocean keeps its secrets, but here and there it offers a little theater. A school of dolphins appears off the bow one morning, keeping pace with the ship for nearly an hour, leaping in arcs so neat they might have been trained. Another day, a seabird with long streamer tails lands on the main yard, hitching a ride for the better part of the afternoon, before disappearing into the blue. Through it all, the ship moves, hour after hour, into more heat, more sky, more sea. Somewhere ahead lies Mauritius, your next and only stop before Java. For now, the horizon is an unbroken line, the wind is steady, and the sound of the carpenter's mate playing in the dark is enough to make the long, uneventful crossing feel almost like peace. Land announces itself by scent before sight again. Wet green on warm air, a breath of leaves and damp soil you haven't smelled since the Canaries. Then the island rises, steep shoulders of volcanic rock, a fringe of pale surf, and a tight collar of palms tossing their hands at the wind. Mauritius sits there like a sunlit punctuation mark in the Indian Ocean, and the whole ship seems to lean toward it the way you lean toward a table when the dessert plate appears. Closer in, you make out a bite of a bay and a scatter of huts along the shore, more smoke than buildings, really. There's no grand harbor yet, only a makeshift anchorage. You'll stand off and send the boats. The water turns the color of an old emerald, so clear you can see fish flicker over white sand patches between dark coral blotches. Men who have talked tough for weeks go quiet. Even the cat stands on the rail with a proprietary air, as if she ordered this place for delivery. Mainstream historical fact slipped in while you're admiring the surf. The Dutch abandoned their Mauritius colony in 1710 after disappointing harvests and too many cyclones. The French claimed it in 1715 and renamed it Isle de France. But in the 1720s, it's still little more than a garrison and a few hardy settlers. Big development won't really kick in until the 1730s. For now, this is a rest stop in the truest sense. Water, wood, a little food, and whatever rumors the ocean has washed up lately. Anchors splash and bite, the longboats go over with the easy clatter of practiced hands. You're in the first, oars dipping, shoulders finding that old river rhythm. The shore smells like hot stone and leaf shadow. When the keel grates the sand, you jump out and your legs pull their usual trick of trying to walk like the deck is moving. You sway, grin, and forgive them. Dry land again, however briefly. Joke 1, Pete claims the island is tilted, then admits it's just his sea legs arguing with gravity. There's a watering place where a stream slips down from a dark gully into a brackish pool. You help roll casks up the beach and stand them under a trickle while men wedge leafy branches around the lip to filter out grit. It's a slow fill, but cold, and you can feel the ship already tasting it in your mind. Timbers, rope, and salt-softened bodies bracing for that first gulp. A small group of French soldiers watches from the shade, muskets slung more for habit than threat. Their officer, a neat man in a faded coat, swaps greetings with your captain in a mixture of French and Dutch that both pretend not to find funny. Trade happens in a low murmur. A few casks of local wine, a sack of limes and small oranges, bundles of fresh greens that smell like pepper and sun. You're sent to help haul a crate of unfamiliar roots. Someone says manioc, someone else says kasana, which is the same thing wearing a different hat. The cook's eyes glitter with plans that involve boiling things until they give up. You choose to be optimistic. After all, he redeemed the pork with apples once, and you're still talking kindly about the bay leaf that tried so hard back in Biscay. Quirky tidbit. One of the Frenchmen shows you a jar of clear oil he says they render from giant tortoises, used for lamps and medicinal rubs. You nod with the cautious politeness you reserve for new ointments, and he adds, with a shrug, that the tortoises can live in a ship's hold for weeks without feeding. That may be true, but the cat gives the jar a look that somehow conveys both moral judgment and a firm refusal to be rubbed in anything that used to be a turtle. Historians still argue whether crews routinely kept live tortoises on board for months or if most were butchered ashore. Journals and bones suggest both, depending on season and scruple. You're given an hour's liberty in small cares while the officers haggle for timber. The path along the shore is spongy with needles where casuarina trees lean and whisper. Higher up, the forest is a tangle of ferns and glossy leaves with a light that pulls green around your ankles. Birds you can't name scissor from shade to sun, and once a huge fruit bat crosses above you like a folded umbrella, suddenly remembering a meeting. Joke 2. Pete points at it and swears it's the local herald delivering invitations to a storm. A small garden patch near a hut surprises you with orderly rows of things you recognize only vaguely. Squash vines, patches of herbs, a hedge of something that smells like clove when you rub it. A woman under a palm offers you a cup of something cool, water steeped with a peel of lime and a sprig of crushed leaves. Your mouth goes awake, bright and grateful. You don't speak her language, but your face says enough. You trade a button for a handful of those leaves for the ship's surgeon, who lights up like a lantern when he smells them. He will pronounce the infusion medicinal, and no one will argue. News travels in eddies here. From a French sailor, you hear about a pirate, a quick one with a white scarf, La Bousse, seen to the north among the islands off Madagascar, clever at melting into inlets and poor at paying tavern bills. Another rumor says a Dutch ship came through a month ago and limped on with a sprung mast. Another that a hurricane took 2 small traders last season and stripped a valley clean up to the rocks. The Indian Ocean is a wide, quiet storyteller who knows how to let the worst lines drop in at the end. You file the names away like you file knots, not for immediate use, but ready. Back at the beach, the last casks are corked and sealed. A few planks lie ready for the carpenter, straight-grained and smelling of sap. He strokes one like a man greeting a long-lost cousin. The captain signs a receipt with a flourish. The French officer returns a bow, and somewhere a goat makes a noise like a rusty hinge. You help shove the longboat off the sand and hop in, toes wet, shoulders ready. The oars bite clean, the boat surges, and the water goes almost glass where your blades rise. A squall leans across the peaks inland and rakes them with gray. The air thickens, then releases in a soft shower that barely wets your shirt before the sun takes it back again. Up on the anchored ship, shadows move, sailors peering down, faces sharp with that look men get when land is close but not theirs. You think of the Cape's tablecloth cloud, of the albatross riding air like a line drawn by a confident hand, and again of the coin tucked under the mast for luck. This island feels like the same kind of coin, small, bright, hammered with use. Back aboard, the deck tilts slightly unfamiliar under your feet, but muscle memory returns with the first heave of the tackle. Casks thump into their cradles below. Greens vanish into the galley like prisoners with a good lawyer. The hold breathes new smells: wet wood, lime zest, a faint floral note you'll later discover is from a bundle of leaves the surgeon hides under his bunk for science. The purser chalks fresh figures with a satisfied click of tongue on teeth. Joke 3, he says the water is so good you can taste the rocks, and Piet says he preferred the rocks with wine. As evening folds over the anchorage, other lights wink on. The French huts, a small campfire deeper in the trees, the brief flare of a pipe along the beach. Your lanterns answer. Someone plays the battered violin. The tune sounds cleaner for having bounced off a mountain before it reaches your ear. For a moment, the ship feels moored not just to the seabed, but to a whole humming shoreline. Crickets in the grass, wind in palm fronds, a faint, steady hush of surf you can hear even when you go below. The captain decides on an early departure. Weather fair, supplies good, pirates rumored. Men breathe a little faster at the last word, even as they pretend they didn't. Lines are checked, boats made fast, anchor bent to rise with dawn. You take your hammock early and lie there with the land's green still behind your eyelids. The cat curls into a citrus crate and dreams of judging new things. Somewhere, a lemon rolls again, found and stopped by a careful foot. You're grateful for the small routines that keep the big journey gentle. Bay leaves doing their best, vinegar barrels lifting spirits, a coin under a seam, a song bouncing off mountains, and the honest promise in a full water cask. The next morning, the anchor comes up with a sigh of chain and a creak of timber, and Mauritius begins to slide backward in the pale light. The mountain ridges sharpen for a moment against the sunrise, then dissolve into a bluish haze until they're just another cloud bank you know is land pretending. The sails are set with brisk efficiency. No drama, no shouted corrections, just the clean slap of canvas and the steady groan of yards as they turn to catch the wind. The island's green smell lingers a few hours in the rigging before it's swallowed by open sea air again. The mood aboard shifts with the horizon. The calm of port has evaporated. Men walk faster, speak shorter, as though they can already feel the weeks ahead pressing on them. Supplies may be fresh, but they're finite, and there's a lot of ocean between here and Java. The carpenter has a neat stack of Mauritius planks to turn into repairs, and the purser guards his citrus barrels like a dragon hoarding gold. Mainstream historical fact: the run from Mauritius to Batavia could take anywhere from 3 to 7 weeks, depending on winds and the captain's route choice. Many VOC ships took a more southerly course to catch steady winds before turning north into the Sunda Strait. It was a stretch where stores thinned, tempers frayed, and minor repairs became major concerns if left too long. This was where discipline, or the lack of it, could make or break a voyage. By day 3 out, you feel the edges of that discipline tightening. Watches are kept sharp, work rotated so no man grows too tired or too idle. You spend a good part of one afternoon ratting down loose casks in the hold. The motion of the sea has grown sharper, a bit more unpredictable. You can hear the water slosh in the barrels like someone pacing in the dark. Above, the rigging shivers now and then as the wind flickers, but overall it holds steady enough to keep you moving east. Quirky tidbit: the surgeon decides this is the perfect time to introduce a tonic brewed from the lime leaves picked up in port. He steeps them in hot water, adds a pinch of sugar, and claims it will clear the head and sweeten the stomach. Half the crew swears it tastes like the garden in Mauritius. The other half says it tastes like the garden after rain, and they're not wrong. Historians still argue whether such concoctions were made for actual medicinal value or simply to keep men's minds off the sameness of water and biscuit. You drink yours slowly, mostly for the warmth. The galley turns experimental again. Cassava from Mauritius finds its way into a starchy mash that's not bad with salted fish. Joke 1, Piet says it tastes like the idea of bread that never quite finished thinking. You mop the plate anyway. Anything new is worth eating twice. Days pass with little more than the hiss of water along the hull and the endless pale dome overhead. To break the monotony, the captain orders sail inspections aloft, even if nothing seems amiss. You climb the shrouds to the tops and higher, balancing on foot ropes while the mast sways beneath you. From that height, the ocean's color changes every few seconds. Slate gray under a cloud, then deep sapphire in a burst of sun. No land, no ships, just an unbroken circle. The weather starts to test you in small, sly ways. One day the wind drops just enough to make the sails sulk, and the ship roll more heavily. Another day, it gusts hard and sudden, sending spray over the bow that stings your face like sand. You learn to keep your oilskin at hand no matter how fine the morning looks. Joke 2. Piet says the Indian Ocean has the mood swings of a tavern drunk, friendly one moment, picking a fight the next. The work gets more creative as the voyage lengthens. The carpenter invents a patch for a chafed yard sling using a scrap of sailcloth and a piece of tortoiseshell he's been hoarding since the Cape. It works, and he struts the deck with quiet pride, as though he's personally outwitted the ocean. The cat, sensing calm weather, resumes her daily inspection of the ship from bow to stern, pausing at each coil of rope as if auditing the knotwork. She curls to sleep near the helm during the dog watch, her tail flicking in rhythm with the ship's gentle yaw. Evenings are the softest time. The sun drops low and smears the sea with molten copper, and the wake glows faintly after dark. The fiddler plays slow reels. A pair of hands hum in harmony until the sound is as much a part of the ship as the creak of the timbers. Historians still debate whether this music-making was officially tolerated or merely overlooked. All you know is that nobody tells them to stop. By the fourth week, the stores have thinned enough to be felt. The bread smells faintly of the hold now, and you check each biscuit before biting. Salt meat portions shrink a little, though the cook stretches them with cassava and greens. Joke 3. Someone claims the last batch of stew was seasoned with the shadow of a pork bone waved over the pot for luck. The wind starts to pull more from the south, a sign that the turn north is getting closer. The mate spends long minutes with the log line and the chip log, measuring your speed and quietly conferring with the captain. You feel the ship's course change almost in your bones, subtle at first, then more definite. The swells shift underfoot. The air warms by a breath. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Java waits. One clear night, you go forward and lean on the rail. The sea is as smooth as beaten tin, the stars sharp enough to snag your eyes. You think of the long road from Amsterdam, the IJ's gray water, Biscay's stew, the flying fish, the tablecloth cloud over the Cape, the green hills of Mauritius, and realize how far you've come in the slowest way possible. Ahead, the dark is unbroken, but it feels full, as though the last stretch is gathering itself to meet you. The sails whisper above, the helm creaks, and the ship leans ever so slightly, already smelling the narrowing seas of the Sunda Strait. The first sign isn't sight at all. It's a thin ribbon of scent that threads through the morning watch and ties itself in a knot behind your eyes, warm, peppery, a whisper of clove and smoke and leaf mold. You pause, rope in hand, and breathe again to be sure. There it is, faint, teasing, gone, and then back, stronger. Pete lifts his head like a hound on a trail and announces with great authority, Java is seasoning the ocean. Joke 1. You sneeze immediately, which ruins your attempt at appearing seasoned yourself. By noon, the horizon proves the nose was honest. A low, dark smudge resolves into a coastline that grows teeth, forested ridges stepping up and back, blue-green and damp-looking even at this distance. To port, the suggestion of another landmass, Sumatra, looms like a sleeping animal separated from Java by a strip of shimmering water. The air takes on weight again, not the slack heat of the doldrums, but a humid living breath that smells like soil and sap stirred by wind. The Indian Ocean's long swell flattens, complicated by cross-chop from water sliding between islands. The ship answers with a new gait, shorter steps, quicker nods. Mainstream historical fact, The passage you're angling toward, the Sunda Strait, has been a major doorway for east-west trade for centuries, the quickest path into the Java Sea and on to Batavia, the Dutch East India Company's stronghold since 1619. It's a busy throat in the world's windpipe, notorious for shifting shoals, capricious currents, and local craft that can appear out of nowhere and vanish just as fast. The captain's chart for this bit looks like a spider's Sunday best, all inked soundings and notes. Sails are trimmed, then trimmed again, the crew working with that quiet, purposeful speed you've learned to love. The mates keep their voices low, but urgency hums in the lines. You can almost feel the ship lean toward the gap, hungry for the narrowing sea after so much open sky. The cat takes a supervisory position near the larboard rail, eyes narrowed, tail curling in a slow, pleased question mark. It seems even she can smell land and its mice. Closer, the water changes color by patches, jade, pewter, then a sudden brownish green where a river's outflow smudges the sea. Drift, bamboo poles, palm fronds. Once an entire thatch roof slides by. You point, Pete shrugs and says, "Storms," in a tone that includes the memory of 100 unseen tempests. A low hum reaches you next, too regular to be wind. Drums? No. Oars. Your eyes find them. Slender proas knifing across the ruffled water, their crab-claw sails cocked, outriggers lifting like gull wings. Each seems to skim rather than float, and they crisscross without colliding, as if practicing ship dodging from birth. One veers closer, then politely just outside your wake. Men in bright headcloths wave, and one taps his cheek with a red-stained finger, laughing. Quirky tidbit. Betel nut chewing tints saliva and lips of vivid red. Sailors' journals marvel at smiling mouths like lacquer. The man flicks a small bundle neatly up onto your deck, a twist of leaves around something fragrant. The bosun eyes it, suspicious. The surgeon eyes it, intrigued. Negotiations happen in gestures and chuckles. The bundle turns out to be a pinch of clove and a little bit of nutmeg. Pete offers a wedge of lemon in exchange, the universal sailor's coin. Everyone looks pleased with the trade. You suspect the nutmeg will find its way, illicitly or otherwise, into tonight's stew. Joke 2 arrives pre-ground. The cook declares he's been waiting months to meet a spice that isn't named salt. Clouds build over the interior in tall, bruised stacks, promising the afternoon thunder showers Java breeds without effort. Between them, the light slants, striking wet leaves into a glossy, almost metallic green. Birds appear, not the ocean wanderers you've known, but quick, purposeful flyers. Frigate birds like cutouts from black paper, terns chattering like gossip. In the distance, a symmetrical cone pokes up from haze, one of Java's many volcanoes, a geometry lesson wrapped in jungle. Off to starboard, a bruised lump of island squats in the channel. Krakatoa, just another forested rock for now, innocent of the nightmares it will someday invent. You file the name away without knowing why it sticks. The ship slows as the captain tests the strait's moods. The lead line goes forward, and a hand with a sing-song voice calls the soundings. "By the mark! A quarter lift 5!" The cadence becomes a lullaby you could sleep to. The water boils in odd places where currents meet. The helm answers with little corrections you feel in your knees. Historians still argue whether crews genuinely counted on smelling spices across open water, or if expectation primed their noses. It may be both, and you decide it doesn't matter. The scent is here, whatever its path. It laces every breath, soft as a memory. From the west, a rain curtain sweeps the strait with visible feet. It hits you with a warm slap and is gone in 5 minutes, leaving beads on the rigging that glitter like strings of glass. The carpenter, who's been hoarding pride since his tortoise-shell patch, fishes a broadleaf from the scupper and uses it as an impromptu hat. The crew rates its fashion with vicious seriousness. Boats are tallied. The leaf hat wins most likely to withstand a squall. Joke 3. Pete claims the leaf hat outranks the captain's wig on account of being waterproof. Trade winds thin into trickster breaths that curl around the sails and let go. You haul on braces like tuning a giant instrument, looking for the note that will carry you through this watery hallway. The smell of wood smoke reaches you, villages cooking the day's end. Then another scent, darker, tannic, mangroves breathing swampy secrets into the air. Someone mutters about Batavia's fevers. Someone else spits over the side and knocks wood twice. You remember the surgeon's lime leaf tonic and hope he keeps the kettle on, whether for medicine or morale. Near sunset, the strait glows in swaths, copper where sun touches, pewter under clouds, jade in the lee of islets. More proas slip by, indifferent and intimate at once. One carries baskets piled with green pods. A hand lifts one, shakes it, and the rattle carries clean across the water. Peppercorns, you're told. You breathe in and swear you can feel the itch of them in your nose again, the same sneeze rising like a chorus. Mainland now, Java proper, lifts its skirt to show you muddy ankles where rivers meet the sea. The captain chooses the overnight drift toward the inner seas rather than forcing the strait in full dark. Sails are reduced. The anchor kisses the bottom in a quiet, scraping hello that feels more like a handshake than a stop. The crew moves softly as if the land might spook, coils laid down with care, voices no louder than necessary. The cat, pleased with the arrangement, performs a condescending inspection of the new smells and allows herself a yawn you could call approving. Supper brings the worst-kept secret of the day. The tiniest scrape of nutmeg appears in the pot. No one mentions it, everyone tastes it. The stew takes a step forward in the mouth, and there is a small collective sigh around the bowls. The purser pretends to count spoons as a disciplinary measure, while his own portion vanishes with suspicious speed. The vinegar barrel, old friend, makes the rounds with an air of retired heroism, and you give it a polite nod on its way by. You go forward and sit on the cathead, feet dangling, and watch the strait think. Lights blink on a shore, lanterns in huts, firefly dots along the waterline, a slow orange thread where someone's clearing brush. A drum beat travels lazily over the water. 2 notes, then 3, the sound stretched by distance until it's more heartbeat than percussion. Far above, heat lightning stitches and unstitches a cloud. Nearer, a bat tilts and corrects, its leather wings making almost no sound. The ship's coin under the mainmast seems to hum a little in your memory. Lucky so far. Careful still. You remember Biscay's valiant bay leaf, the albatross's eye, the leaf hat's election, and the way Mauritius smelled like a cool room in a hot house. You might not say it aloud, but you carry these things as if they were charted points, a map of gentle triumphs and survivals that have delivered you to this scented threshold. Batavia is close enough to taste in the air, clove smoke, swamp, boiled rice, tar, human breath. The voyage is not done, but it has started to gather itself for a last quiet landing. Below, hammocks bloom like pale cocoons. Above, the spars draw long, dark strokes across a star-wet sky. Between the two, you breathe in Java until your chest feels heavier and easier all at once. When sleep comes, it brings you a dream of walking into a market where all the spice jars are open and nobody minds that you stand there, eyes closed, living on the smell. Daylight slides across the water in thin, milky sheets, and the strait's cluttered geometry gives way to a wider, browner plain ahead. The pilot boat finds you just after dawn, a low craft with a crab claw of a sail and a man whose eyes seem to have memorized every sandbar between here and breakfast. He comes aboard with a quiet nod, glances once at the clouds bunching inland, and then points his whole hand toward the east, as if moving a piece on a board he's played longer than you've been alive. The helm answers. Your ship's long months resolve into these last careful miles. The smell reaches first. Clove smoke in thin, sweet ribbons. Palm sugar caramelizing somewhere you can't see. A swampy undertone like wet wood warming in a closed room. The water turns an opaque green-brown, wrinkled by cross currents. To port and starboard, low islets squat like lazy crocodiles, bristling with scrub. Ahead, the horizon breaks into verticals, masts, rooftops, the hulky angles of warehouses. Batavia. Sails come down in stages, a tidy undressing. The pilot gestures, and your crew, already working in that quiet, taut rhythm you've learned to trust, eases the ship toward the roadstead. Anchors rumble and plunge. You feel the chain's final thud in your soles, a polite handshake with the bottom. Shore traffic thickens around you immediately. Prows and lighters, long, low boats with men standing to the oar, each piled with firewood, rice, baskets, jars, and hopeful looks. A man in a conical hat holds up a basket of green mangoes like a priest offering a benediction. Pete looks at you as if to say, "This is the part where everything happens at once." Mainstream historical fact. Founded by Jan Peterson Cohen in 1619 on the ruins of Jayakarta, Batavia is the Dutch East India Company's administrative heart in Asia. Castle, warehouses, mint, courts, and a tight grid of Dutch-style streets veined with canals meant to feel like Amsterdam transplanted to the tropics. It worked on paper. In practice, stagnant water and marshy ground made the city famous for fevers. Historians still argue whether Batavia's deadly reputation in the early 18th century stems more from malaria breeding in canals and rice fields or from contaminated wells and dysentery. Either way, you can feel the air's heavy breath even before you go ashore. A company boat arrives with a tidy man and a tidy book. He checks your ship's name, captain's name, point of origin, and a dozen other things that seem more important than your existence. Papers are exchanged, bows traded, and a small wax seal goes onto a larger piece of paper that everyone pretends to admire. The purser smooths his whiskers like a cat and tucks the document away, where you imagine it will nestle next to the lemon ledger and the vinegar barrel's attendance record. Joke 1. Pete whispers that the seal probably says, "You made it, please don't touch anything." The first shore party is granted, a handful of hands for messages and arrangements. You draw the lucky straw. A lighter noses alongside, and you drop in, knees bending, arms finding the old river rhythm as the oarsmen pull for the mouth of the river. On the way in, you pass ships at every stage of being ships, newcomers dragging their anchors as if shy, veterans sun-bleached and patched, dozing on their chains, a skeletal hull on a mud bank becoming less ship each tide. The pilot's men thread you between them with obscene ease. The river's mouth is a muddy grin between mangrove teeth. The lighter slides into its breathless warmth, and every smell turns up a notch. Spice and swamp and wood smoke and people. The banks are a clatter of life. Malay boatmen arguing with Javanese porters, Chinese traders in blue jackets counting strings of cash coins, Mardikers, Portuguese-speaking freedmen in bright sashes lifting crates with their steady pickle yokes. You pass under a low bridge and the city opens. Whitewashed walls dazzling in the sun, black roof tiles sweating heat, and above it all the tight, fort-square silhouette of the castle of Batavia, with its flag hanging limp between lazy puffs of breeze. Quirky tidbit: as you bump along the quay, you notice the walls of some houses glitter faintly in the sun. Pete, who knows more than he should about buildings he doesn't live in, says the lime in the mortar is made from burned seashells, a shine that tells you the city is literally stuck together with the ocean. Later, you will hear that bricks sometimes arrive as ballast from Holland and become streets here, roads you can walk that once rode inside the bellies of ships. Heat works like a second crowd, present, insistent, taking your elbow and steering you whether you want it to or not. The company's factor's office is a cool shadow behind a thick door. You deliver letters, a packet tied with blue ribbon for the Governor General's people, another for the warehouse clerks, and wait while someone applies another seal to something, and another man makes neat strokes in yet another book. Outside, a bell tolls, and a file of soldiers in drab coats tramps across the square, muskets shouldered, faces flushed in the heat. A trio of Chinese porters trot past under yokes, their loads bobbing, and their coins make a whispering clink that sounds like rain. The canals at midday look like strips of green silk stewed too long. Dragonflies stitch their surfaces. Water hyacinth knits itself into idle rafts along the edges. A boy squats at the steps rinsing rice, and a woman moves past with a tray of something that smells like coconut and charcoal. You get a cup of sweet dark coffee from a stall, thick and smoky, punched with sugar, and the surge of it wipes half the voyage from your eyes in a blink. Joke 2. Pete says if the surgeon had brewed coffee from lime leaves, no one would have argued about the medicine. You walk with the messenger along a street that can't decide which continent it's on. Dutch gables glare down at palm fronds. A canal runs between them, punctuated by brick bridges neat as eyebrows. A clerk with a powdered wig holds a parasol over his papers. A Javanese boy darts past with a tray of fried plantains. A dog sleeps in a shred of shade that can't possibly be doing anything. A wheelbarrow squeals. A woman with beetle-red smile laughs behind her hand. The air is text, layers of it, written in clove and mud and human breath. Company men in linen coats nod to your captain in the square, all pale faces and wrist flicks, and one insists you step into a warehouse just a moment. Inside is winter, cool shade, rows of barrels, tidy bundles of rattan, stacked bales of pepper, the sharp, clean ghost of nutmeg that seems to sit inside your head rather than in your nose. You want to hug a bale. You do not hug a bale. The factor would write it down. Business flows around you like tide water. Rates are recited, weights weighed, samples sampled. You are sent with a scribbled note to the castle gate, where a guard looks at you, at the note, and at you again with the professional suspicion of a man who finds pleasure in making sure doors are not for everybody. He relents. The castle yard is a geometry of shade and glare, drilled into rectangles by habit. Somewhere inside, a pen scratches. Somewhere else, a man coughs. The deep, wet sound that makes people look away. You remember all the warnings about fevers, and you feel the small soap-smooth weight of the coin under your mainmast in your mind. Luck and caution, both. When you step back into the street, the sea breeze has remembered its job. It comes in like a patient clerk, filing the heat into manageable folders. The harbor haze thins. The signal flag over the castle stirs with a single board flap. The lighter is waiting at the quay, and the boatman flicks a mosquito off his wrist with the same mildness he'd use to lift a cup. Between river and roadstead, the city's noise falls away until all you hear is the push and chuckle of brown water and the boatman's measured breath. Your ship stands on the offing like a beloved blunt-nosed house, spars black against the sky, cat probably judging the scene from the rail. You pass a proa loaded with earthen jars. A woman taps one and nods toward your lighter with a question in her eyebrows. Piat negotiates without words and produces 2 copper coins. One jar slides aboard, a syrupy palm vinegar that could either cheer a stew or melt a spoon. You cradle it like a newborn, ready to recrown the vinegar barrel as morale officer emeritus. Joke 3. Piat bows solemnly to the jar and calls it Your Excellency, which feels fair. Back at the ladder, you climb home into the ship smell. Tar, wood, sweat, citrus ghost, spice hint. The deck is already rearranging itself toward work. Guy ropes laid out, tackles roved, men's faces set in the specific cheerfulness of people who know they are about to lift more than they want and will do it anyway. The captain stands with the pilot, heads together, their hands sketching routes and schedules in the air. Somewhere below, the carpenter is laying out wedges and skids, and you can hear his low hum, the tune he plays when he's sure something heavy will move exactly where he wants. You steal one last look toward the city. The sun has tipped over its noon fever and settled into the long gold of late afternoon. On the river, barges cast duplicate shadows. On the quay, a hawker's cry thins into a ribbon and snaps in the breeze. Above the roofs, a cloud stack bruises into purple and then lets it go. You taste clove on your tongue, or maybe you want to. You think of the albatross's long shadow, of the leaf hat's brief reign, of Mauritius's cool green, of Biscay's galloping bay leaf doing its best, of the coin stitched under your world. You are here, at the hinge the company built between oceans and ledgers, and the ship is ready to be unstitched into warehouses and weighed into memory. The bell marks the hour. Lines snake down into boats. A whistle trills. Your feet move before anyone tells them to, because now the voyage's quietest trick is about to happen. The ship will turn into cargo, and the cargo will turn into stories stacked in rooms, and you will be the tired, pleased hinge between them. The cat, of course, chooses this moment to yawn and sharpen one claw on the main fife rail, unimpressed by empires. You square your shoulders, flex the rope burn scars into readiness, and take your place on the line, heat and spice and swamp in your lungs. The city hums, the ship breathes. Somewhere, a jar of vinegar clears its throat. The first sling load goes overside as if the ship is exhaling. Bales of pepper, not the neat domestic pinch, but whole sacks with their own weather, swing and bump against the lighter's gunwale. Men on the quay shout and answer. Poles fend off, ropes pay out and take in again, and you stand in the running knot of it, your hands doing the old work. Haul, belay, ease, repeat. Months of motion are converting into weight and inventory, and every creak of the block is a line from your ship's long, quiet diary being copied into another book. There's a rhythm faster than sailing, but calmer than panic. Pepper first, because pepper is coin with a smell. Then nutmeg, clove, and cinnamon. Company cargo, both incoming and outgoing, each with a clerk to note, a factor to nod, a tallyman to stroke his quill. Casks thud, bales sigh, crates present their iron-bound shoulders for your rope to hug. The carpenter's skids guide heavy things with the grace of a ballroom partner. He hums that same tune you've learned to trust. When the hum is steady, nothing goes wrong. Mainstream historical fact: Batavia's roadstead and warehouses existed to make motion efficient. Ships anchored, lighters ferried, and the castle scales turned smell into silver. The VOC ran this machine like a ledger with tides, moving spices outward and silver, textiles, and provisions inward, all under a bureaucracy thick enough to stop a broadside. Historians still argue whether the company's sheer paperwork helped preserve order or strangled initiative. Either way, you can feel the weight of ink almost as strongly as the weight of pepper. Down in the hold, you can finally see the ship's bones. Light slips in through the hatch in pale swaths, making the ribs' curves look like the inside of a giant whale you managed to befriend rather than be eaten by. You step around the last citrus casks, their straw perfumes the dim with one final bright note, and guide a crate of rattan to the sling. The cat watches from a safe height, perched on the combing with the spared dignity of a dock inspector. Joke 1. P8 salutes her and asks if she'll sign for the receipt. The cat yawns and signs the bosun instead. The stevedores on the quay move with an economy that makes you jealous. Javanese porters swing picul yokes onto their shoulders and set off in double time, bare feet slapping boards, faces composed in that work calm you recognize from 1,000 dawns at sea. Chinese clerks tally with the speed of rain. Malay boatmen cross current as if their boats are thoughts, and the river is a sentence they're editing. The air is thick with calls, coughs, clove smoke, and the thin metallic clink of cash coins threaded on cord, money that sounds like a wind chime someone keeps in a drawer. You ferry one last barrel up, and the purser, who has looked increasingly like a pleased owl, pats it fondly. It's the vinegar, of course. He has arranged to trade for a fresher batch of palm vinegar in enormous earthen jars, but he won't release the old comrade until the new one is aboard. Joke 2, he whispers that the barrel would be promoted to Commodore of Morale if titles were edible, then adds that titles are in fact not edible. P8 asks, "Have you tried?" And the purser glares with theatrical offense, which is the closest you've ever seen him get to a smile. Midday heat hits like a polite hammer. The pilot suggests a brief pause while the tide turns and the lighter traffic untangles. You find a bit of shade under the main deck and sit on a coil of line that remembers your shape. The ship is lighter by tons, and she sits differently on the water, stiffer, almost offended by the absence of her own burden. You lay a hand against the inner planking. The wood is warm and surprisingly smooth, as if months of flex and salt have polished it to honesty. You think of the coin tucked under the mainmast and wonder if it can feel less weight above it. If metal, size. Quirky tidbit. A boy on the quay hawks little paper-wrapped cones of palm sugar, the top dusted with something white. Pete buys one and breaks it in half. Inside is shaved coconut and a dusting of ground clove, so delicate you feel it more in your nose than your tongue. He presses the other half into your hand with the solemnity of sacrament. It melts on your tongue into a taste that seems to pack the entire voyage into a moment. Heat, wood, smoke, sweet. You tuck the wrapper into your pocket like a letter. The afternoon shift begins with a delicate load, porcelain in straw-packed crates. You move more slowly, feeling every tiny protest through the rope. A porter on the quay slips, recovers, and then lifts his hand to show he's fine. Everyone's breath goes out at once. Then iron-bound chests, coin for coin, silver for spice, come aboard with the gravity of planets. You strain and listen for any new note in the blocks. The ship answers with her usual choir, plank, pin, line, all the known voices in their familiar keys. From the castle, a messenger arrives with a folded paper and the Governor-General's neat seal. The captain reads, nods, and sends back his own little stack of words. Orders for ballast, instructions for the return leg, perhaps a note on fevers and which wells to avoid. You don't see the content, you see the weight. The company's language moves like wind, invisible, inescapable, and capable of pushing a ship without touching it. Historians still argue whether sailors felt pride or merely obligation in being tiny cogs in such a vast machine. You find a sideways pride in doing things well that no one but the ship will ever thank you for. Near dusk, someone brings aboard a scrap of sail that has been stitched into a hat. Broad, ridiculous, familiar. The leaf hat's younger cousin wins a brief election by acclamation and sits on Pete's head at a decisive angle. Joke 3. He doffs it to the vinegar jar and says, "Your Excellency, the people have spoken." And the jar, being a jar, offers no objection. The last loads go overside smoother than the first. A bale bumps and then behaves. A crate, marked with brush strokes you can't decipher, lands with a thump and a wave from the porter, who's carried 3 dozen already today. Ropes are flaked and coiled, blocks greased, slings stowed. You feel a strange, pleasant emptiness under your boots, as if the deck has learned to float on quiet as much as on water. And then the noise falls away. The lighters pull off. The quay's cries flatten with distance. The ship, half unburdened, rests like a creature who has eaten, worked, and now plans to nap. You lean on the rail, the very spot you watched Amsterdam blur into mist, and look back at Batavia glowing like embers under the first star. The smell that once battered you has settled into layers, clove at the top, swamp underneath, a ribbon of smoke, and the ordinary human smell of dinner. Pete joins you with 2 tin cups, not rum, coffee, thick and sweet and smoky, bought for too much money from a boy who grinned as if he were selling a secret. You drink in the slow way that means you're not thirsty anymore. You just want to keep the heat moving through your hands. The cat appears and presses her head briefly against your shin, a gesture she would deny in daylight. In the rigging, a faint breeze collects and lets go, as if trying on the movements it will soon need for the homeward run. You think of the long string of images that led here. The bay leaf in Biscay doing its brave best, the ship's cat rejecting salt cod with philosophical dignity, The albatross drawing a clean line across a dirty sky, the coin under the mast, the leaf hat's rain, Mauritius's green breath, the flying fish that volunteered for breakfast, the vinegar barrel clearing its throat in crucial moments, the first smell of Java, which you can still summon just by closing your eyes and believing in it. You hold them like worry beads, counting not prayers, but patient hours. Up on the quarterdeck, the captain dismisses the pilot with a shake of hands. Men drift toward hammocks. You should follow, but you stand a minute longer and let the slow stillness of a ship at rest soak into your bones. Outside the bar of work and wind, there is a rarer hum, contentment without performance. Your shoulders drop, finally. Not a victory trumpet, just the quiet click of a job that fits the hands that did it. You touch the rail with your salt-slick fingers, the same rail you clutched leaving Amsterdam, gripping for balance when the North Sea tried on a scowl, tapping superstitions into wood in the doldrums, and steadying yourself around the Cape's mean-spirited wave. The wood is warmer now, or maybe you are. The bell taps the hour. Lanterns flower along the deck. Somewhere in the city, a drum beats once, twice, and calls it a day. The ship eases into a hush you can hear, a softness that lengthens each breath without asking. You feel it guide you, down the ladder, along the familiar shadows, past coils of rope that smell faintly of citrus and rain. Your hammock waits, slack and kind. When you ease into it, the canvas holds you like two steady hands, and even the little sway is smaller tonight, as if the sea has pulled a blanket over its own shoulders and chosen to be polite. Voices on deck drift into a cottony murmur, nothing sharp enough to snag. A lantern's glow lays a warm coin of light on the plank, and you remember the real coin tucked under the mast, small and bright and patient. You breathe in slow. Clove at the top, coffee and wood in the middle, the clean salt of rope and skin at the base. It settles you, like a hand smoothing a wrinkled sheet. The cat lands softly somewhere above you, making her rounds, paws placed like commas in a long sentence. A little breeze wanders down the hatch and brushes your cheek, cooler than it was at noon, curious in its gentleness. It lifts a strand of hair and sets it down again. You let your shoulders sink. Your jaw unwinds. Outside, the harbor makes simple, sleepy sounds. The slap of a small wave against a lighter's side, the creak of a fender, a laugh from very far away that doesn't need you to answer. The ship answers them all in the language you've learned. Groan, sigh, hush. She isn't going anywhere for a few hours. Neither are you. Images bloom and fade without effort. The albatross coasting on rails of invisible wind. The ridiculous leaf hat surviving a squall. The bay leaf trying its little heart out. A flying fish sparkling for the length of a breath. A mountain with a white tablecloth of cloud that never quite falls. They hang at a distance, harmless, like lanterns along a quiet road. Your hands, empty now, forget their knots. Your feet stop correcting for a deck that isn't moving. Somewhere, a jar of vinegar gives a dignified little settle, and you smile at the ceiling, because of course it does. The bell will mark another hour soon, but it doesn't belong to you. Not this one. This one is all softness and warm wood and air that is cooled just enough to forgive the day. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the ship breathe for both of you. The masts draw their slow lines against the night, and the stars are patient. There's nothing to haul, there's nowhere to be. Just the quiet, filling the hull like kind water, and your breath shallower, slower, right on time.